The fracture is collapsing, and I'm still inside it. Dust rains from a ceiling that shouldn't exist. Stone that was solid a second ago turns to smoke in my hands. And right in front of me, hovering in midair like it's mocking me, is a golden chest that belongs to somebody else. Not to me, never to me. I'm an F-rank runner. I carry bags. I'm not even supposed to be this deep. But the chest doesn't care about rank. A cold blue light wraps around it, and a voice that isn't a voice, more like a pressure behind my eyes, says 4 words that change my entire life. Unclaimed debt detected. Reassigning owner, now. The chest cracks open. Something ancient and starving pours out of it, and wraps itself around my arm, like it's been waiting years for exactly this moment. And that's when the screaming starts behind me. Not monsters. Hunters. Watching the item they nearly died for fly straight into the hands of a nobody. I should be dead in about 11 seconds. I know that. I can see it on their faces. 3 days ago, none of this made sense to me either. My name is Ren Hale, and I've been poor for as long as I can remember. Not budget a little tighter poor. Poor like counting coins for medicine poor. Poor like my little sister Mira coughs blood into a rag every night, and I still haven't found a way to pay for the cure. 7 years ago, a tear opened in the sky above our city. We call them fractures now. Doorways into somewhere that wants us dead. Monsters pour out. People with power called hunters go in and kill them for money, fame, and loot. Rare enough to change a bloodline forever. I'm not a hunter. I'm a runner. Bottom of the bottom. I haul gear. I carry water. I drag bodies out when the real hunters don't want to. F-rank, unranked, invisible. The kind of person nobody remembers unless they need someone expendable. That day, my job was simple. Carry supplies for an S-rank raid team going after a Tier 9 fracture called the Hollow Cathedral. Guild names stitched across their backs. Ash Crown Order. The best of the best. People who make more in one raid than I'll make in 10 years. I wasn't supposed to fight. I wasn't supposed to matter. Then the ceiling came down. A support beam the size of a bus slammed into the tunnel behind me, sealing off the exit, sealing off the entire team. In half a second, I went from guy carrying bags to guy trapped alone with something ancient waking up in the dark. That's when I heard it breathing. Something huge. Something old. A cathedral warden. The raid team's real target. Half collapsed and furious. And it hadn't even noticed the S-ranks yet. It noticed me first. I had no weapon, no skill, no stat sheet worth reading. I had a supply bag and 40 seconds to live. And then, for the first time in my entire life, a blue window opened in front of my eyes. System. Host meets ledger conditions. Initializing. I didn't ask for it. I didn't earn it. It just arrived, the way debt collectors arrive. Uninvited, and never with good news. The warden lunged. I didn't dodge so much as fall backward into a gap in the rubble, and its claws missed me by an inch that felt like a mile. My heart wasn't pounding anymore. It had basically stopped. Then the window spoke again. Debt located. 3 unpaid lives. Interest accrued. 7 years. I had no idea what that meant. I still don't. Not fully, but something in my chest cracked open at those words, like a door I didn't know was locked. The warden reared back for a killing blow, and that's when the golden chest appeared. The one meant for the Ash Crown Order once they finally brought the beast down. Except the beast wasn't dead. The chest just showed up early, hovering, waiting. Unclaimed debt detected. Reassigning owner. The chest split open, and a blade poured out of it like liquid starlight, wrapping itself around my forearm, fusing there, hungry. A weapon called the Starving Fang. A relic so rare that guilds go to war over rumors of its existence. And it chose me. The warden's claw came down. I didn't think. I swung. The strike that came out of my arm wasn't mine. It moved faster than my body should be capable of, cut deeper than a first runner has any right to cut, and it opened the warden from shoulder to hip in a single motion. The monster that had survived 3 previous raids died in 4 seconds, screaming a sound I still hear when I close my eyes. The rubble shifted. Light poured back in, and the Ash Crown Order team broke through just in time to see me standing over the corpse of their target, holding the weapon they were promised, glowing with power that should never belong to someone like me. Silence. Then their vanguard, a man named Bastion Ford, said one word: thief. That's how the worst night of my life became the first night I actually had a chance. I tried to explain. Nobody wanted to hear it. In their eyes, an F-rank nobody had somehow murdered their kill and stolen a relic worth more than my entire neighborhood combined. Bastion raised his blade. I raised the fang without meaning to, and it moved on its own, blocking a strike that should have taken my head off. Enough. The voice cut through the tunnel like a blade of its own. Everyone froze, including me. She walked in wearing the white and gold coat of an S-rank ace, hair silver white despite a face barely older than mine, eyes the color of a winter sky. Celine Ashworth, rank 3 in the entire country. The kind of hunter children put on posters. She looked at me for exactly 3 seconds. Then she looked at the starving fang wrapped around my arm, and something in her expression changed completely. Stand down, she told Bastion. Now. He didn't argue. Nobody argues with Celine Ashworth. She crouched in front of me, close enough that I could see she wasn't looking at my face. She was looking at the blue light still fading from my chest, the last traces of the system window closing. Where did you get that ability? She said quietly. Not a question. An accusation dressed as one. I told her the truth, because I was too scared to think of a lie. A window appeared. It called something a debt. It gave me the weapon before the warden even died. Her hand tightened into a fist. That's not possible, she whispered. He's dead. That skill died with him. I had no idea who he was. At the time, I had no idea I'd just stepped into the middle of a story that started long before I was born, and that I was about to become the reason it started again. She let me go. She didn't have to, and everyone in that tunnel wanted her not to. But she looked at me one more time and said 4 words I couldn't stop thinking about for days. Don't use it again. I should have listened. I didn't, because that night, when I got home, Mira was worse. Her fever had climbed high enough that the neighbor lady sat with her, pressing a wet cloth to her forehead, whispering that we needed a Tier 6 cleansing elixir or she wouldn't make it past the month. A Tier 6 elixir costs more than I make in 2 years of hauling bags. I looked at the starving fang still wrapped around my arm, humming faintly, waiting. And I made a decision that would burn my entire life down and rebuild it from the ashes. The system window opened again on its own, like it had been listening. Debt collection available. Nearby. Unclaimed excess loot. Tier 6 raid. Ash Crown Order. An excess loot ping. A raid happening across the city, right now, where a team was about to bring down a mid-tier fracture and split rewards nobody would even notice going missing from the surplus pool. I didn't understand the mechanics yet. I just understood one thing. It was pointing me toward Mira's cure. I told myself it was one time. Just once. Get the elixir, save my sister, never touch the ledger again. I had no idea that, just once, was about to become the most dangerous addiction of my life. I found the raid site an hour later, hiding on a rooftop above a half-collapsed fracture, where a B-tier team was finishing off the last wave of Shade Wolves. I had no business being there. I had no plan beyond hope. The window pulsed. Activate collection? I said yes out loud, like an idiot, and the world went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with sound. For 6 seconds nobody could see me. Not the guards, not the team, not the drone recording the raid for the guild archive. I moved through that battlefield like a ghost, while a golden thread pulled loot straight out of the reward pool and into a pouch that shouldn't have been able to hold it. A Tier 6 elixir. 2 stat crystals. A small pouch of gold. Then the window flashed red. Warning. Theft detected by residual ward. Trace applied. I didn't know what a trace meant yet. I found out 3 days later, when 2 enforcers from a completely different guild kicked down my apartment door looking for the ghost who's been robbing raid pools across the city, and I realized, with my heart in my throat, that I wasn't the only one who'd started noticing something impossible was happening. I was fast. I got Mira and myself out through the back before they searched the bedroom. But standing on that fire escape, listening to strangers tear my home apart looking for me, I understood something for the first time. I hadn't gained a god-level ability. I'd started a war I didn't know the rules to. Mira got her elixir that night. Watching the fever break on her face was the first good feeling I'd had in years. And for about 4 hours, I actually believed I'd found a shortcut around a life that had never given me one. Then I found out what the ledger really costs. The window opened again while I was walking home, and this time it didn't ask permission. Debt interest accruing, collection required within 72 hours or penalty applied. I stared at that message under a streetlight for a full minute before I understood what it meant. This wasn't a gift, it was a loan. And loans come with collectors. I tried to ignore it. Big mistake. On the second night, pain ripped through my chest so sharp I dropped to my knees in an alley, blood in my mouth, the starving fang burning against my arm like it was punishing me for hesitating. Penalty applied. 4% host vitality drained. 4% of my life. Gone. Just for not stealing fast enough. That's when I understood the real shape of what had happened to me. I hadn't found a weapon. I'd inherited a debt from someone who died owing it, and the system had decided I was the one who had to pay it back. In loot, in power, in risk. One theft at a time, forever, unless I found a way to close the account completely. I had no idea whose debt it originally was. I was about to find out it belonged to Celine Ashworth's dead brother, and that finding out was going to get people killed. Word travels fast when there's money attached to a name. 3 days after the trace ward flagged me, a bounty notice went up on every guild board in the district. No photo, no real description, just a nickname and a number large enough to make ordinary people start looking twice at strangers on the street. Hollow Thief. 40,000 gold. Alive preferred. I found out the hard way, when a bounty hunter named Corin Vasker cornered me outside a noodle stall 2 blocks from the safe house, grinning like he'd already spent the reward. He wasn't guild-affiliated. Worse, he was independent, which meant no rules, no reporting chain, nobody to answer to if things got messy. "You don't look like 40,000 gold," he said, cracking his knuckles. I didn't have time to argue. He came at me with a paralysis dart launcher, and the only reason I'm alive to tell you about it is that the ledger flared on instinct, ripping the launcher's charge crystal out of his weapon mid-draw before he could fire. He wasn't happy about that. Neither was I, watching him pull a second weapon out of a hip holster like he'd been planning for exactly this outcome. The fight that followed wasn't clean. It wasn't cinematic. It was 2 scared, desperate people in an alley. And I only won because the Fang moved faster than fear could stop it, catching his wrist and slamming him into a wall hard enough to end the fight before it turned fatal. I let him live. I don't know why, exactly. Maybe because some part of me still remembered what it felt like to need money badly enough to do something stupid. But I took his launcher, and I took the bounty flyer out of his coat pocket, and standing there reading my own nickname printed under a number that could feed my whole street for a year, I understood something new. I wasn't just running from Ashcrown anymore. I was running from every stranger with a debt of their own who thought I might be the answer to it. For the next 2 weeks, I lived 2 lives at once. By day, I was still Ren Hale, F-rank runner, hauling bags for guilds who didn't know my face. By night, I became something the raid boards started calling the Hollow Thief. A rumor, a ghost, a name whispered by furious S-ranks who kept finding their reward pools 3 or 4 items lighter with no explanation. Not every collection felt clean, and one in particular still bothers me more than any fight I've been in. 9 days after the tunnel, the ledger pinged an opportunity during a D-rank raid led by a woman named Old Pharaoh, a runner-turned-independent hunter who'd clawed her way up from nothing over 15 years, the hard way, without a system window ever helping her once. Her reward pool wasn't excess. It was everything she had, earned honestly, meant to pay off a debt on her own daughter's apprenticeship fees. Debt collection available, eligible target detected. I stood on that rooftop for a long time, watching her count coins into a pouch with hands that shook from exhaustion, and I couldn't do it. I let the window close without answering, and the ledger punished me for it within the hour. Collection declined. Penalty applied. 6% host vitality drained. Pain doubled me over on that rooftop, worse than anything before it. And for the first time I understood the ledger wasn't actually asking me to take from people who deserved it. It was asking me to take, period. And it didn't care whose hands the loot came out of, as long as the math balanced in its favor. That was the night I promised myself something the system never agreed to. If I was going to keep paying this debt in stolen power, I'd choose the targets myself from then on, penalty or not, and I'd aim every single collection at guilds and hunters who'd built their fortune the same way Draven Cross had. Off people like Old Pharaoh, off people like my parents, off people who never got a system window to fight back with. Every collection made me stronger. The system didn't just steal loot for me, it converted a slice of whatever I took into raw stat growth, locked deep inside the ledger where nobody could see it on a public rank sheet. I went from barely able to lift a supply crate to dodging a mid-tier beast's opening strike without thinking, and nobody around me had any idea why. Nobody except one person, who'd been watching me a lot closer than I realized. Celine Ashworth found me on a rooftop 11 days after the tunnel collapse, sitting with my legs over the edge, catching my breath after a collection that had nearly gone wrong. I didn't hear her land behind me. That should have told me everything about the gap between us. "You're getting sloppy," she said. I nearly fell off the roof. She caught my collar without even looking, hauled me back like I weighed nothing, and sat down beside me like this was a completely normal way to meet someone. "I've been tracking the Hollow Thief for a week," she said. "I didn't expect it to be you." I tried to lie. She held up a hand before I got 2 words out. "Don't insult both of us." She wasn't there to arrest me. That confused me more than anything else that night. An S-rank ace, sitting on a rooftop with the thief half the city's guilds wanted dead, and she looked more tired than angry. "That ability," she said, staring at the Starving Fang, "belonged to my brother." And that's when the real story started. Her brother's name was Corvin Ashworth. 8 years ago, before the guild rankings even existed in their current form, he'd manifested the same system, the ledger. After a fracture collapse eerily similar to mine, a debt from a life owed, a weapon that chose him, a power that grew every time he collected what wasn't his. He used it to climb from nothing to S rank in under a year, and then, according to the official guild record, he died in a raid gone wrong. "That record is a lie," Celine said, and her voice went flat in a way that scared me more than any monster had. "I know who killed him. I've known for 6 years. I just never had proof." I asked her who. She said a name I'd heard my whole life on posters and news broadcasts. The founder and Grand Master of Ashcrown Order, the guild that had been hunting the Hollow Thief hardest of anyone. Draven Cross. I froze. Because 7 years ago, the fracture collapse that killed my parents happened on a raid led by the same guild, under the same man. Celine saw my face change and understood immediately. "You too," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. I told her what I remembered. My parents were day laborers for Ashcrown, hauling supplies just like I did now, caught in a fracture collapse the guild called an unavoidable natural event in the official report. No compensation, no investigation, just a payout so small it barely covered the funeral, and a system that apparently decided, 7 years later, that the debt had never actually been closed. "He does this," Celine said. "He's done it for years. He lets low-rank workers die in collapses that aren't accidents, buries the evidence, and keeps the compensation his guild was supposed to pay. My brother found out. That's why he died." For a second, neither of us said anything. Then she looked at the fang wrapped around my arm and said something that changed the entire direction of my life. "The ledger doesn't pick random people, Ren. It picks people the system has decided are owed something it never got to pay. You didn't steal that weapon from my brother's memory. You inherited an unpaid account he never got to close." I asked her the only question that mattered. "What happens when the account closes?" She didn't answer right away. When she finally did, her voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. "I don't know. Nobody's ever gotten that far. Corvin died at 60%. That night, I stopped thinking of the ledger as a burden and started thinking of it as a weapon, aimed directly at the man who killed my parents and her brother. That should have made things simpler. It made them so much worse. Because 2 days later, Draven Cross found out the hollow thief had a face, and that the face belonged to me. I never learned exactly how the leak happened. Maybe a ward I missed. Maybe Bastion Ford putting pieces together after that first tunnel collapse. All I know is that I was hauling a delivery crate through the market district when 6 enforcers in ash crown black surrounded me in broad daylight, and the crowd around me scattered like I was already dead. Their captain didn't bother with questions. Grandmaster Cross wants the Fang back, he said. Alive is optional, I ran. Bad idea against 6 trained hunters. But the Fang moved before I could think, deflecting a strike aimed at my spine, buying me 2 seconds I used to bolt into an alley, too narrow for their formation. The system flared, hot and urgent. Emergency collection available. Proximity theft. Ash Crown Enforcer gear. I didn't hesitate this time. I let it happen. Golden threads ripped a stun charm and a mobility crystal straight off the belt of the enforcer closest to me mid-chase, and he went down cursing, tripping 2 others behind him. I got away. Barely, but standing in an alley 3 blocks later, hands shaking, blood on my lip from a strike that had grazed me, I understood something that terrified me more than the chase itself. Draven Cross now knew my face, and he wasn't going to stop until he either owned the ledger or watched it die with me. I couldn't go home. If they'd traced me that easily in the market, my apartment wasn't safe, which meant Mira wasn't safe. I got her out through a friend of a friend, a healer named Priya who owed me a favor from years back, and I paid for a week of hiding with the last of the gold I'd collected. Sitting outside that safe house that night, I finally let myself feel how alone I was. No guild, no rank, no name anyone respected. Just a stolen weapon, a system that was slowly draining my life if I didn't keep stealing, and a monster of a man who'd already destroyed my family once. That's when Celine found me again, except this time she wasn't alone. She brought Bastion Ford with her, and for one heart-stopping second I thought she'd sold me out. Then I noticed the bruises on his knuckles and the guild insignia missing from his coat, and I understood. He quit an hour ago, Celine said. After I told him what I told you, Bastion didn't look happy about any of it, but he looked at me, really looked, the way he hadn't back in that tunnel, and said something I didn't expect. I've been on 11 raids where a runner died in a natural collapse. I never asked why the compensation forms were always signed before the bodies were even found. He exhaled hard. I should have asked years ago. 3 of us? Against a man who ran the largest guild in the country. It should have felt hopeless. Instead, it felt like the first time since the tunnel that I wasn't fighting alone. Celine laid it out plainly. Draven Cross had spent a decade building his empire on hushed-up deaths and unpaid debts, and the ledger was the one thing that could expose every single one of them, because every unpaid debt it detected came with a record attached, buried in system data nobody could fake. If we can force a full collection, she said, the ledger doesn't just take his loot, it pulls the record of everything he owes. Every death, every cover-up, all at once, in front of witnesses who can't be bought. I asked how we forced that. Her answer made my stomach drop. The grand trial. In 9 days. Every major guild competes. Live, in front of the entire country. If Draven's on that stage when the ledger triggers a full collection, there's no guild security team big enough to bury it. 9 days to get strong enough to survive standing next to a man who wanted me dead, in front of cameras broadcasting to millions, with a weapon that was actively shortening my life every time I used it. I said yes anyway. I didn't have a choice. I also, for the first time, actually wanted to. We had a plan. We didn't have time to celebrate it, because 2 nights later, someone inside Priya's own network sold us out. I found out when Priya showed up at the safe house door at 3 a.m., pale, out of breath, telling us a courier, who'd carried supplies for us twice before, had been seen leaving an Ash Crown side office an hour earlier, with a pocket full of gold he didn't have yesterday. He knows the safe house location, Priya said. He knows about Celine. He might know about the trial plan. Bastion was already moving, grabbing gear, telling us we had maybe 20 minutes before it stopped being a warning and started being an ambush. Celine wanted to run. I didn't. If we run now, we lose the location we need for training. And we lose time we don't have, I said. We flip it, instead. It was the first real plan I'd ever proposed, instead of just reacting to whatever the ledger threw at me. And I could see it land on Celine's face, something between surprise and the beginning of actual trust. We fed the courier false information the next morning, a fake safe house 2 districts over, and watched from a rooftop as an Ashcrown strike team wasted an entire night raiding an empty building. It bought us 4 extra days nobody had been counting on, and it taught me something I needed to learn before the trial ever happened. I wasn't just a weapon the ledger used. I could think 2 steps ahead of people who'd spent their whole lives being trained to think that way, and that scared Draven Cross's people a lot more than the Fang ever could. The next 9 days were the hardest of my life, and somehow the best. Celine trained me in secret, teaching me to move with the Fang instead of letting it move me, showing me how to trigger a collection with intention instead of desperation. Bastion taught me formation work, how to read a fight 3 moves ahead, how to survive against people stronger than me by making sure I was never where they expected. Each night I checked in on Mira through Priya, and each night the news I got was a little better. The elixir was holding. Color was coming back to her face. It gave me a reason to keep pushing when my whole body wanted to give out. Bastion pushed harder than either of us expected, and on day 4, it nearly cost him something he wasn't ready to lose. He'd set up a sparring drill meant to simulate a real enforcer ambush. Full contact, no system assistance allowed on my end, so I'd learned to read an attack instead of relying on the Fang to save me. I froze at the worst possible moment, the same way I had in that tunnel weeks earlier, and his practice blade caught me across the ribs hard enough to crack one. He didn't apologize. He crouched down next to me while I coughed through the pain and said something that stuck with me longer than the bruise did. Every runner who died on an Ashcrown job froze exactly like that, at exactly the wrong second, because nobody ever taught them not to, he said. I watched it happen 4 times and told myself it wasn't my job to fix it. That's the real reason I quit. Not because of what Celine told me about Draven, because I finally admitted I'd known something was wrong for years and let it keep happening anyway. I asked him why he was telling me this now. Because you're about to stand in front of the man responsible for it, he said, and I need you to survive that, not freeze in front of him the way I froze for years. We ran the drill 4 more times that night. I froze twice more. By the 4th attempt, I didn't. The ledger grew faster than any of us expected. Every controlled collection during training pulled small threads of stat growth into me, and by day 6 I wasn't the same person who'd frozen in that tunnel. I could match Bastion in short bursts. I could see Celine's openings before she took them, even if I still couldn't capitalize on most of them. Then, on day 7, everything nearly fell apart. An Ashcrown patrol found the safe house. Not by tracking me, by tracking Celine, whose sudden absence from public raids over 9 straight days had raised exactly the kind of questions Draven Cross was paid to notice. They hit us at night. 6 enforcers became 14, and this time they weren't chasing a scared runner through an alley. They were hunting 3 people who'd gone quiet at exactly the wrong time, and Draven had sent people strong enough to make sure none of us walked away to talk about it. The fight that followed was the worst thing I'd ever been part of. Bastion went down early, a spear through his shoulder, and for one horrible second I thought he was dead. Celine fought like something out of a legend, cutting through 4 enforcers in under a minute, but even she couldn't hold 14 alone forever. The system flared, hard, insistent. Full collection available, warning. Unstable at current growth level, proceed? I didn't hesitate. I said yes, and the world tore open around me. Every weapon within 30 feet lit up gold at once. Every enforcer's gear, armor, blades, mobility crystals, all of it, ripped toward me in a storm of light, so violent it cracked the ground beneath my feet. My arm screamed like it was being torn off. Blood ran from my nose, my ears, everywhere at once. But when the light cleared, 14 enforcers stood there with nothing. No weapons, no armor. Just terrified people who'd walked in as hunters and walked out as targets. They ran. All of them. And I collapsed onto the broken ground, coughing blood, the ledger flashing a warning I didn't have the strength left to read. Host vitality, 61%. Overuse penalty active. Celine dragged me and Bastion both into the safe house basement before backup could arrive, and I remember her hands shaking as she pressed a cloth to the gash on my forehead, her voice cracking for the first time since I'd met her. "You weren't supposed to go that far yet," she said. "You could have died." I told her the truth, because I couldn't lie anymore. Not after that. I told her I would have rather died protecting the first people who'd ever actually fought for me than survive by leaving them to fall. She didn't say anything back. She didn't need to. The look on her face said everything. That was the night I stopped being the hollow thief hiding in alleys and started being someone willing to stand in front of Draven Cross on purpose. 2 days before the grand trial, Priya sent word that shook everything loose. Mira had asked, for the first time since the fever broke, where I'd been going every night. Priya had lied for me as long as she could. Now my sister knew something was wrong, and she was scared. I went to see her, even though it was risky, even though every part of the plan said stay hidden until the trial. I needed her to hear it from me. She looked so much better than the night I'd carried her out in a panic. Still thin, still tired, but alive in a way that made every risk I'd taken feel worth it. I told her some of the truth. Not all of it. She didn't need to carry the weight of Draven Cross yet, but enough that she understood I was fighting for something bigger than either of us. "Are you going to win?" she asked me, the way only a little sister who trusts you completely can ask a question that big. I told her yes. I had no idea if it was true, but I needed her to believe it, and honestly, I needed to hear myself say it too. She hugged me before I left, and for just a second, I let myself be Ren Hale, Big Brother, instead of the hollow thief carrying a stolen god-level ability into a fight against the most powerful man in the country. Then I walked out the door, and the countdown to the grand trial began for real. The night before the trial, Celine got called in front of the guild council without warning, and for 2 hours, none of us knew if she was walking into a hearing or a trap. She came back with her jaw tight and her hands still shaking slightly, the kind of shaking that only shows up after someone spent an entire room full of powerful people questioning their loyalty to their own family name. "They know I've gone quiet," she said. "They know Bastion resigned." Someone on the council floated the idea that I'm protecting the hollow thief instead of hunting him. "Are they wrong?" Bastion asked, only half joking. "No," she said, "but they can't prove it yet, and if they suspect it before tomorrow, they'll pull me from the trial roster completely, and the entire plan falls apart before it starts." That's when I understood how much she'd already put on the line for someone she'd known less than 3 weeks. An S-rank legacy, a family name, a council seat waiting for her the moment she wanted it. All of it balanced on a decision to trust an F-rank runner, because the ability wrapped around his arm used to belong to her brother. I told her she could still walk away. I meant it. She looked at me like I'd insulted her. "My brother died because nobody believed him when he said Draven Cross was a murderer," she said. "I'm not making that mistake twice." Nobody said much after that. There wasn't much left to say. We spent the rest of the night going over the plan one final time, checking every piece of it for cracks, knowing that tomorrow there wouldn't be a second chance to fix anything that broke. The morning of the trial, the entire capital shut down to watch. Screens the size of buildings broadcast the arena to every district, every guild hall, every home with a working signal. Ashcrown Order entered first, banners flying, Draven Cross walking at the front like a king reviewing his kingdom, and the crowd roared his name like he was already a legend, instead of a man with 2 unsolved deaths tied directly to his guild's ledgers. I entered under a different guild banner, a tiny independent registry Celine had pulled strings to get me listed under. 3 days old. Nobody had heard of it. Nobody looked twice at me. That was the plan. The trial worked in rounds. Team battles first, then individual duels for the top scorers, broadcast live with judges and healers, and a security detail large enough to make our entire plan feel insane the moment I actually saw it in person. Bastion's job was simple and dangerous. Get close enough during the team rounds to make sure Draven Cross ended up on the main stage during the individual duels, where cameras couldn't be shut off without causing a national scandal. Celine's job was to survive her own matches without revealing anything early, staying visible, staying trusted, staying exactly where Draven expected his top ace to be. My job was the one nobody thought I'd survive. Win enough small matches to get noticed, then lose on purpose to the one opponent who'd guarantee I faced Draven Cross directly. The plan held for the first 3 matches, barely. My second opponent was a C-rank spear user who nearly ended everything before it started, catching my shoulder with a strike that would have gone through my chest if the Fang hadn't twisted my body out of the way on pure instinct. I won by margins so thin, the judges argued about it for a full minute before calling it. "You're supposed to lose small," Bastion muttered through the calm crystal in my ear. "Not nearly die winning." "Working on it," I muttered back, blood on my lip, heart still hammering from a strike that had come within an inch of ending the entire plan early. My fourth match went better. I let it go on just long enough to look competitive, then dropped to a well-placed feint that any real judge should have caught and none of them did. Because nobody expects the guy from a 3-day-old independent guild to be sandbagging. The crowd booed. I'd never been so relieved to be booed in my life. By the 6th match, whispers had started climbing through the stands. Guild scouts murmuring about the strange unranked fighter who kept losing in ways that didn't quite add up. I felt eyes on me that hadn't been there an hour earlier, and across the arena, I caught Draven Cross watching my matches with an expression I didn't like at all. He wasn't confused. He was patient. Like a man who already knew exactly what he was looking at and was simply deciding when to say so out loud. On the 7th, it fell apart completely, because Draven Cross looked directly into the crowd cameras, straight at the little independent guild banner I was standing under, and smiled like a man who'd known my face the entire time. "Bring out the Hollow Thief," he said, loud enough for every screen in the country to carry it. "Let's see what a stolen weapon looks like on live broadcast." Gasps ran through the entire arena. My stomach dropped through the floor. He hadn't been fooled for a single second. He'd let me walk all the way to this stage on purpose, in front of the whole country, exactly where he wanted me. I had no choice but to walk out onto that platform, Starving Fang glowing at my arm, 40 million eyes watching a 19-year-old runner face the most powerful guildmaster alive. "Everyone watching," Draven announced, voice smooth as poison, "is about to see a criminal who murdered a warden meant for Ashcrown Order and stole a national relic. I've been generous letting him run. That generosity ends today." He raised a hand, and the arena's containment field flared to life around us, sealing the platform into a duel neither of us could walk away from without a winner. I should have been terrified, and I was. But standing there, staring at the man who'd erased my parents' deaths as an unavoidable natural event, something else rose up underneath the fear. Something that had been waiting 7 years for exactly this moment. "You killed my parents," I said, loud enough for the broadcast mics to catch every word. 7 years ago. Ashcrown raid, fracture collapse, ruled an accident. You buried the report before the funeral. The confidence on his face cracked, just slightly, just enough for the cameras to catch it. "You killed Corvin Ashworth too," I continued, "when he found out what you'd been doing to workers like them for years. And you've been hunting me because I'm the proof that the debt never actually closed." The arena went dead silent. Millions of people, and you could have heard a coin drop. Draven's mask slipped back into place fast. "Lies from a thief desperate to justify his crime," he said, but his voice had lost the smoothness from a second ago, and every commentator in the booth above us heard it. "Then let's find out," I said, and I let the ledger open fully for the first time in front of the entire country. Full collection, primary debtor identified, Draven Cross, initiating maximum extraction. The field around us exploded into gold light so bright half the broadcast feeds whited out for a second. Every stolen coin, every buried record, every ounce of power Draven had built off a decade of unpaid deaths, tore itself out of him and into me all at once, and his scream echoed across every screen in the country. Data files that Ashcrown Order had spent years hiding materialized in the air above the arena in glowing panels nobody could turn off. Compensation records forged, deaths ruled accidents that weren't, a name at the bottom of every single one. Draven Cross. Corvin Ashworth's case file hung in the air longer than the rest, evidence of a murder made to look like a raid death, and I heard, somewhere in the stands, Celine make a sound I never wanted to hear again. Draven fell to his knees on live broadcast, stripped of power he'd spent a decade stealing, exposed in front of the entire country he'd spent that same decade fooling. "This isn't over," he snarled, blood on his lip, eyes still burning with something dangerous even on his knees. "You have no idea what you've actually inherited, boy. You think this is my debt? My debt was already owed to someone else." I didn't understand what that meant. Not yet. Security finally broke through the containment field, arresting what remained of Draven's inner circle live on air, while the rest of the country watched a decade of lies collapse in real time. I dropped to one knee on that platform, the ledger flashing a message that should have felt like victory. Debt closed. 100%. Remaining balance transferring. Remaining balance. I didn't like the sound of that at all. I collapsed before I could ask what it meant. The world going white at the edges. And the last thing I remember is Celine catching me before I hit the ground. And a voice I didn't recognize, calm and cold, cutting through the chaos of the arena from somewhere in the stands nobody was watching. So it finally chose someone again. While I was unconscious, the Guild Council convened an emergency session that Celine told me about later, piece by piece, once I was strong enough to actually listen. Ashcrown's senior board tried to distance themselves from Draven within hours, releasing a statement calling his actions the isolated conduct of one individual, which might have worked if the ledger hadn't already broadcast years of signed compensation forms with other names on them too. 3 more executives were named in the data before the night was over. 2 resigned before sunrise. 1 tried to flee the capital and was stopped at a transit checkpoint by security teams who'd been watching the broadcast just like everyone else. The council debated, for almost 4 hours, what to do about me. An unranked fighter who'd used an unregistered, unclassified system ability on live national broadcast wasn't exactly a clean legal category, and half the room apparently wanted me detained for questioning regardless of what I'd exposed. Celine stood in front of that entire council and told them that if they touched me, she'd release everything she personally knew about her brother's murder to every independent press outlet in the capital, guild approved or not. Bastion backed her, still bandaged from the spear wound, standing on a leg that clearly wasn't ready to hold his weight. They let me go, reluctantly, and with what the official record called continued monitoring. But they let me go, and by the time I actually woke up, the story had already spread far enough that half the city knew my name before I did. I woke up 2 days later in Priya's safe house, Mira asleep in a chair beside my bed, healthier than I'd seen her in years. The Tier 6 elixir I'd stolen weeks ago had done its job completely, and for one quiet morning, everything felt like it might actually be okay. Then Celine walked in with a report that ruined that feeling instantly. Draven Cross had escaped custody during transport 2 nights ago. No trace, no trail, gone like he'd never been caught at all, which, given everything else that had happened, terrified me more than if he'd simply died on that platform. "That's not the worst part," Celine said quietly, and she showed me a fragment of footage pulled from the arena's outer cameras, time-stamped exactly to the moment the ledger had said, remaining balance transferring. A figure in the stands, hood pulled low, unmoving, while an entire arena panicked around them. Watching me collapse, watching the fang glow one final time on my arm, and in the recording, just audible under the chaos, the same voice I'd heard as I passed out. So it finally chose someone again. Good. That makes this easier. I asked Celine who it was. She didn't know. Nobody in the arena's records matched the footage. No guild claimed them. No system database had a name. Bastion spent the better part of a day running the footage through every registry he still had access to from his old Ash-Crown credentials, before Priya finally found something the guild databases never would have flagged. A worker registry from 30 years ago, half destroyed, the kind of record nobody digitizes because nobody thinks it matters anymore. One entry, near the bottom of a page eaten away by water damage, listed a name next to a fracture collapse ruled, like so many others, an unavoidable accident. The handwriting was old enough that half the letters had faded, but the surname was still legible. Thorn. "That can't be a coincidence," Celine said quietly. staring at the page like it might rearrange itself into an answer if she looked hard enough. That collapse happened 30 years before Draven Cross was even born. Which meant whatever this was, whoever the hooded figure actually represented, it wasn't just older than Draven's crimes. It was older than the guild system itself, buried in a debt that had been accumulating interest long before any of us existed to pay it. But the ledger did. A new window opened in front of me the moment I finished watching the clip, one I'd never seen before, cold and final in a way none of the others had been. Notice: original debt reassigned, true creditor located, collection sequence beginning. I stared at those words for a long time before I understood what they actually meant. The debt I'd inherited from Corvin Ashworth, the debt Draven Cross had spent his life trying to bury. None of it had been the real account. It was a fraction of something much older, something that had been waiting far longer than 7 years, and it had just noticed me. By the time I could stand on my own again, the story had already reshaped my entire life without my permission. Strangers on the street recognized my face now, some grateful, some afraid. A few still convinced the broadcast had been staged. Guild scouts who wouldn't have looked at an F-rank runner twice a month earlier were suddenly leaving offers at Priya's front door, none of which I trusted for a second. Mira thought it meant we were finally safe. I didn't have the heart to tell her yet that the ledger's new message meant the opposite, that everything we'd survived so far had only been the first page of an account that went back further than either of us could see. Draven Cross thought he was my biggest problem. He had no idea what was actually coming for both of us. Before we jump into the next chapter, I need a small favor from you. Let's smash 800 likes on this video to unlock the next chapter as fast as possible. And if you're enjoying these manhwa recaps, subscribe to the channel and help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers. We're already at 300, so every single subscription brings us one step closer. Thanks for the amazing support, and I'll see you in the next chapter.